Chris? All
I
right,
am happy to. Go ahead, Rory.
I'll let you kick off and then I'll do some housekeeping once you're ready.
Okay, sounds good. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. It is October 11th today, and this is a meeting of the Governor's Task Force on Broadband Access, and it's a new year for us. So welcome back, everyone. After the last several years of work, I think one of the most exciting things I've experienced as part of this group is seeing it in action, seeing the results of our action in my front yard over the last couple of weeks as fiber has been installed in my neighborhood. And I've heard stories from many other people around northern and central Wisconsin that I'm familiar with who've commented about new broadband options that are available to them. So we're starting to see the impact of all of our work. And I think that energizes me here for another year on the Broadband Task Force. I hope it does for you as well. This is our first meeting of the new year. You should all have the agenda that was attached to the meeting invite. I learned that when I emailed Rory in a panic before the meeting saying, I don't have an agenda and I can't find it. And I found it on the invite. I'll hand things back over to Rory to do some housekeeping and the public comments before we jump into our meeting for today. Rory?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Welcome back, everyone. Today's meeting is about 90 minutes long. We're going to end at about 2:30, and we've got a packed agenda, so I'll move quickly. But I just want to remind everyone, this is a public meeting. The meeting is being recorded. I think we also may be on Wisconsin Eye, so just be aware of that as we go. The meeting agenda is available in an obscure part of the PSC website or attached to the meeting invite. So thanks, Chris. And then just a general request, as always, if you're not speaking, please mute so that we can keep a good audio quality. So with that, I will run quickly through our attendance list to just check in and make sure we have everybody here tracked. So I'll start. My list is alphabetical by first name, so I'm going to start with Angie Dickinson.
Here.
Thanks, Angie. Barbara Koldos, I think she told me she's out, but just to double check. All right, State Senator Brad Paff, or any members of his staff. Brett Schupner.
I'm here.
Thanks, Brett. Brittany Beyer.
Here.
Celeste Flynn.
Here.
Thanks, Celeste. Chad Young. All right, I think Chad told me he was not attending. Krish Herjong. Chris Meyer.
Here.
Doug Cox. Chet Streeb.
Here.
Emily Dittmar.
Here.
Thanks, Emily. Gail Hike.
Here.
State Senator Howard Markline or any members of his staff. All right. State Representative Jeffrey Mersaw or some members of his staff. Jennifer Schilling. Jose Martinez. Justin Hebner. Kwame Barnes. Lori Collins, I know she's out. Marta Bechtel, I think she's out as well. State Representative Ratcliffe or any members of her staff.
Here.
All right, I see. Is that Ben?
Yep.
Thanks, Ben. Michelle Schuler. Rachel Shemlin. Biko Baker. Russ Falkenberg. Sal Carranza.
Here.
I see Sal. Thanks, Sal. And Steve Schneider.
Here.
All right. I just want to check in if I missed anyone along the way on that list, or if there have been any new joins since I went through the list. I think we've got everybody. All right. We'll go through public comment now. Our public comment, this is an open meeting, so we welcome public comments. We just ask members of the comment make their comments brief and relevant to the discussion at hand and the agenda at hand today. So this is the sole opportunity for public comment from members. And please, I'll ask unmute your mic and please make your comment. You're also welcome to email comments to us or post them in the chat if you prefer. So at this time, I will ask for public comment and just open the space for any members of the public to comment. All right, I'll ask again, second call for any public comments. All right, last call for public comments. All right, I will say, if you want to make a public comment, you can always send an email or post in chat, and we're happy to have you at any other meeting when we have them. So thanks for that. I'll hand it back to Chris, maybe to move us to our first major agenda item today. Chris?
Thanks, Rory. Our first item for today for action by the group is the Public Service Commission presentation on Wisconsin Digital Equity Plan. And I believe I'm handing that back to Alyssa. I guessed right. All right, it's all yours, Alyssa.
Thank you. Is my screen visible?
It is.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And good afternoon. And just sort of as a reminder, the federal bipartisan infrastructure law had this program that they've sort of dubbed Internet for All. And that's the big umbrella. And under the umbrella of Internet for All are two programs that the commission is administering. One is Digital Equity Act and the other is BEAD. And so we spent a lot of our time talking about BEAD and goals related to broadband, but digital equity is the sister program. And that's what I'm gonna sort of briefly present to the task force on. If you remember, almost exactly a year ago, a lot of us were in Wausau and we had a joint meeting between this task force and the Digital Equity and Inclusion Stakeholder Group. And so this draft report is kind of one of their work products and what they've advised on in the past year. So why did we draft a plan? Here's just a real brief agenda about what I'll talk about in the next few minutes, what were required, who are the covered populations, what were all the actions the state has taken to create the plan, what's in the plan, how do I read the draft, and how do I comment? So why did we draft a state digital equity plan? And I will say the state was in the middle of drafting a state plan before it became a federal requirement, and then it became a federal requirement, which was oh so convenient because we were already working on it. So it is required by the Digital Equity Act, which is part of that bipartisan infrastructure law, for the state to have a digital equity plan in order to access future digital equity capacity funding. We wanted to listen deeply to the people and the organizations that are most impacted by the digital divide and make sure that we're setting goals and measures to best overcome those barriers in the state. We wanted to really acknowledge that Wisconsin has robust and diverse digital equity and inclusion practices in practice already. We have regional economic development organizations, higher education, nonprofits, libraries, school social workers, local government. We have a lot of people and a lot of organizations that are putting really incredible effort into getting people connected, getting them digital literacy, getting them devices. And we wanted to make sure we found all those groups and we're connecting them to each other. And part of that is kind of strengthening this ecosystem of all of those types of organizations. There are a lot of federal requirements for the plan, 2 full pages of them. I'm not going to read all of them, but if you're reading the plan and you wonder, why does this seem redundant? Or why are there so many items in here? Or why did they make it so long? Please know that we were trying to make sure that we were meeting every federal requirement in drafting the plan. So there's needs assessments, vision, goals, measures, objectives, sort of all the things you might imagine in sort of a large strategic planning document. Here's page 2 of those. You can see we have an asset inventory, a strategy, any digital inclusion plans from local governments included, you know, a timeline, etc. One of the big focuses of the digital equity plan was to make sure that we reached out to these groups of covered populations. And these are defined in law in the Digital Equity Act. And they include these following groups: low income households, and that's 150% of federal poverty or below, aging populations, that's over 60, incarcerated individuals, veterans, people with disabilities, people with language barriers, and that includes somebody who might be low literacy or somebody who's a non-native English speaker, racial and ethnic minorities, and rural inhabitants. And this might sound like a long list. In Wisconsin, 80% of the population is in one of these groups or many of these groups because many people are multiple. So this is really most of the state are in at least one of these groups. So what did the state do over the past year since while we've been working on our digital equity plan? We surveyed counties and tribes. We surveyed individuals up to, I put 10,000 here. I actually just heard the numbers now at 11,000 through Wiser. And Wiser was an online survey, but we also mailed 29,000 postcards this summer and then did 600 phone calls. So really substantial outreach to get both served and underserved folks engaged. We met with over 178 groups and organizations that represent or work with the covered populations. So our digital equity outreach team, Jessica, who's presenting later, is on it, Annette, who's on the call, and Chris Stark did many meetings and talked to folks and got their input. We awarded other organizations digital equity outreach funding so they could do deep digital equity outreach work and get feedback. We consulted with tribes, and then, as hopefully many of you know, we did the Internet for All Wisconsin listening tour, where we had over 300 people participate in one of those meetings. So what does the plan include? It includes a vision, mission, and values, goals that we hope to be both ambitious and objectives that are achievable, some strategies for us to continue to work on having a digital Wisconsin that has digital equity for all, and then metrics to show our progress over time. In talking to folks, we the sort of divided things into these 5 value areas. So access, affordability, and adoption, which I hope everyone on the task force is really familiar with. That's what we've often talked about as sort of the way we think about things. But what the digital equity folks heard were sort of 2 more things. And one is trust. And I think that this is trust in what people see online related to scams, related to fraud, also related to maybe the relationship with their internet provider. But we heard that a number of people don't trust what they see on the internet, or they don't trust the information, and that they want to know what's trustworthy. They want to have more trust that they're not going to be scammed. The internet is a safe place, or where it's not safe, they want to understand. And then we heard a lot about sustainability, that people wanted the systems and the support so digital equity continues beyond the federal funding. Where can you read the plan? It's up both on our website and it's in the Commission's IRF system, or the electronic dockets, in this 5 BP 2023. Really encourage everyone to give it a read or to give it a glance. And we are accepting public comments. And please, as task force members yourselves, I encourage you to comment, but if you have a network of people that you think are really stakeholders and might have insights to what is great in the plan or what could be improved in the plan, we really would like public comment. We would like people who care about these issues and think about them and are impacted by them to read the plan and comment. So there's 2 ways. You can either upload a document. There's also a form where you can go type in. And that is it on digital equity. I can pass it. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them, or I can pass it back to the chair, Chris.
Thanks, Alyssa. Any questions? I don't see any.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Rory. Sorry, I didn't see you.
No, that's okay. Alyssa, what happens after people comment? What's next?
Thank you. So public comment goes until October 19th, and then the commission will take it at an agenda. So it will be on a commission agenda, and they'll discuss it in an open meeting. They'll discuss the draft plan and the comments, and then they'll make kind of a a final determination on what to submit to NTIA. And then staff will, I see NTIA is on the call, but I will say staff will work closely with NTIA for any curing or making sure that the plan meets all of the federal requirements or adding any additional pieces that the federal government needs for approval. And then capacity grants come in 2024.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Alyssa? Okay, we will move on to our next item, which is the University of Wisconsin Division of Extension presentation on broadband planning workshops. And I believe that is Gail that is presenting, correct?
It is going to be Gail and Rory. Could you give sharing capabilities to Jessica? And Chris and I will all present. So I just want to introduce my colleagues. For those of you on the task force, you know who I am. I'm Gail Hike. I'm the Outreach Broadband Specialist with University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. And I want to share, introduce to you my two colleagues that are part of our current broadband team. We have Chris Stark. Chris is our Digital Equity and Inclusion Specialist, and Jessica Beckendorf. And Jessa is a Community Development Outreach Specialist.
Just double checking, are you seeing the slide scale?
Yeah.
I am.
All right, great.
Perfect. We can go to the next one.
Yeah, so hello to everybody, and I've seen some of you, Rory and Jaron. I know it's only been 24 hours since we saw each other, so just a hello and continue to do our networking, getting to know everybody. But look, when we say internet for all here, and you heard Alyssa say that just a few minutes ago, we truly mean internet for all. It should be our goal. And so with respect to this group, of course, you understand the importance of telehealth, perhaps especially for seniors, but for everybody, not to exclude anybody. And of course, education, ever present and so important during the COVID shutdowns and everything, just how important that became to us to have good internet. I know that in Forest County, in Crandon, for example, they had to close the school down because in the school district, in the Crandon General School District, just simply didn't have enough percentage of students that had home internet. So economic opportunity, I'll reference the workforce development issue and probably don't need to say anything more about that. And then with respect to quality of life, you take your pick on that one. We live in a very rural area. I'm coming to you from Eagle River today. And so my wife loves to do online shopping, which has its obvious advantages. And perhaps, Jess, you can go to the next one. And so our BEAD activities to date here, I'll reference the county and tribal surveys that Alyssa did earlier. We worked pretty hard on that one. Gail and I made some phone calls. We have I think 79 questions in our county and tribal survey. And we had 70 of 72 counties fill that out, which we very much appreciate, and 6 of 11 of the tribal. With respect to access, my takeaway here, with respect to access, affordability, and adoption, and staying within that parameter, certainly everybody understood that filled out this survey, understood the need for access. And that comes through loudly and clearly. They understood the need for affordability. The challenge, and what's still a low priority and where we have work and some education to do, is with respect to adoption and getting people to understand the need for getting the last percentage of people, the lower income. And this means devices and digital skilling, whether it means upskilling, but also many people, Lisa referenced the covered populations earlier. I worked with seniors, and just a quick comment, a meeting with 88 seniors in Vilas and Forest counties here in the north. 55 had digital skills and 33 did not. So 62%, you can take that, but that's the percentage right now of people that don't have digital skills in the senior population, at least up here. There's a thumbnail sketch, if you will. Oh, Jess, if you want to pick up.
Yeah, so we also offered 8 webinars between February and August of 2023, and they really focused on 3 main themes. Process being the first theme, and so that was our first 3 webinars were solely focused on process, including things like bead planning for counties, tribes, and redos. And those were held between February and April of 2023. The next theme was around organizing, so building your planning team, which was in May 2023. I suppose we're still in 2023. I probably don't need to keep repeating the year. And then on engage and engagement. This was a 4-part series in August on data and community engagement, where we really covered a lot of the pieces, such as how to start to get data from your community, besides also working on mapping data and demographics data. So how do you also engage with the community and get the data from them? Then our toolkit launched September 7th of this year. And I'll be putting the link in the chat here in just a minute, so you can take a look at it when you get a chance. But what's included right now are 6 different modules. Broadband 101, which includes things like definitions and the state of broadband in Wisconsin, how we got here, and where we're going. Organizing your planning team, so information on how to just get started if you're starting from scratch with broadband planning. Getting community input and assessing your community needs. So that has to do a lot more with that community engagement. Pieces that we covered also in August. The next module that we have is data for broadband planning, where to find it and how to use it. Exactly to the point, what everyone wants to know. And then we have more to come in the last 2 modules. Well, there's more to come for all of them. But in the last 2 modules, which is public-private partnerships, what we have there currently is a directory of ISPs. It's really more of a listing right now, but we're working on that. And then under financing, the final module, financing broadband projects, currently links to PSC and NTIA, Broadband USA, and we'll very soon have some additional information we've been putting together for that. So again, more to come. It's constantly being updated. Gail, you are
Yeah, and just maybe while I'm talking, you could put the link so people can copy that link for the toolkit, so you can go and visit it yourself. I think now what we really want to concentrate is our regional workshops and give you more specifics on what we're hearing. And the way we designed the regional workshops is we actually took those things that we just spoke about, the county surveys, tribal surveys, the webinars, the feedback we got. And that's how we developed the curriculum and what we were going to do at those regional workshops. We decided our theme for our regional workshops were going to be maximize the impact of BEAD funding, planning and partnering towards internet for all. And that's really where we concentrated our work. We've actually scheduled 4 regional workshops, 2-day workshops in September and October. We just completed our 3rd one yesterday, so we haven't had many hours since we've seen some of you. And we tried to implement the information that we've gained through these workshops. We spent a lot of time looking at partnering, contracting, how do we up our game with our internet service providers, and partnering to create win-win situations. So a lot of time spent on financing and different alternatives as we look at how we're going to meet our goal and the match, so we can get those build outs done. So we have 3 completed, 1 more to go, and also not on the map yet because we haven't done it, but we will be doing a tribal one for our tribal communities because their needs are a little different, their timelines, their funding sources, and how they operate. So we're in the process of putting one of those together for yet this year. The last piece on that little chart there, as we take a look, you can see the last thing that we have there are county and tribal visits. We've been doing a number of those across the state. I've met with over 30 different communities and tribes across the state in the last year. And so there's been a lot of one-on-one, and we're looking at how do we grow our capacity to help communities and tribes. Next one.
Fine. All right. So now we want to focus a little bit, share with you what we've been seeing from the feedback from the participants, and share a little bit about the geographic reach of the participants. So we created a simple little map here. What you see here is in the dark green, those are counties that had a direct representative attend one of the workshops, whether that representative was from the local economic development organization, from a community within that county, or from the county itself. And we have had a few elected officials and other staff members attend. So the dark green are direct representatives. The light green are the counties that were represented by either a redo or an RPC attendee. So somebody who worked for a regional planning commission or a regional economic development organization attended one of the workshops, and as such, was representing some of those counties. And then the gray are the counties where there has not been any direct or indirect representation yet. We do have one more to go, although it is pretty far in northern Wisconsin, and a lot of those counties are in southern. So we'll see if
we do have at least one of those southern counties that we know will be represented. So
yeah, we do.
We do have a few more.
Yep. And at the Fond du Lac one, we had someone from a nonprofit attend from the southeast Wisconsin. We did not count groups like that in this count. This was really meant to be more of a community planning kind of representation. Okay, and so we've had also over a dozen ISPs join us for these, and some of them are coming to most or all of them. What's been really cool here is that as we've been making contact with the ISPs about these workshops, the interest has been growing. The communication has been growing between the communities and the ISPs, between us and the ISPs, and so it's been really great. And I mentioned that that directory a little earlier. We've also been getting some really enthusiastic response from the ISPs on that directory. So going very well all around.
So what are we hearing so far? These are just some of the general comments that we're taking a look at. I think one of the things we're learning is communities, counties are at very different places in their planning. And so it's been beneficial for them, even though they're at different places, to be able to share and talk to one another and learn from each other. Many of them plan to use the information that they're learning at these workshops to go back and work with their communities. Some of the things that have been particularly helpful, a lot of comments, regardless of folks who are just new to the process or have been planning for quite some time, the piece on funding and financing, because we're really expanding what funding and financing looks like, talking about how can communities help do that financing, and taking a look at everything from tax revenue, general purpose bonds, and taking a look at different bonding solutions that they may have, looking at different sources from organizations that they can tap into. So people are finding that useful, regardless if they're new or experienced in the process. I think the directory of ISPs is something that both ISPs have been grateful that someone's organizing that data, as well as our communities who are saying, we just want a local contact. How do we talk to a live body? So that's something we'll continue to grow, but people have really expressed that that's been very helpful. Access to the toolkit, Jessica talked about that. Folks are excited that they'll be able to go and find pieces, and that pieces will be added. And then bringing that partnership to the next level. Talking about contracts, we've worked hard with Wisconsin Counties Association and the local government, our extension's local government unit, and talking about how do we build those partnerships from more than a handshake to actual contracts, and what do we include in those, and how do we move forward? And those are things that people have identified right off the bat that they thought were very useful. So those are some general comments. And now we want to take a look at the next few slides are really going to take a look at what we're hearing are barriers and gaps. And I think this is our opportunity to listen to what our communities and our ISPs, because they were together in this process, what they're identifying. And we've grouped them kind of in 5 general categories. And we'll go through some of the general themes under each of those. And but we will be sharing more of that information in complete form once we finish the last listening session or the last workshop. And to be honest, we all 3 got home late last night from the last workshop, so we're still implementing and putting together all those notes. But we'll share those with the PSC and with the task force, so you'll have access to those. So Jessica?
Yeah, I'll just very quickly run through this. I know you all can read it as well, but data and mapping was the first overarching theme that we noticed a lot of the comments coming out of the workshops were on. And so this really had a lot to do with sort of the sub-themes that you see here. There's a lot on here about the WISER and OptiMap. Some of that is about how do we know when to use the FCC versus the WISER versus the OptiMap? How do we increase the participation for local planning purposes? And how do we make sure we're not jeopardizing proprietary information and protect security, but still produce a map of dark fiber for planning purposes? How can we do all of those things so that we have the best information possible? And of course, understanding the BEAD challenge process as well. So I'll kind of move on to the next one because we will be providing you all with this information. So don't worry about if we miss 1 or 2 while we're presenting.
We could miss 1 or 2, but the next category, to nobody's surprise, funding and financing. And the first one is quite simply about return on investment, the challenge of that in rural areas, like where I live or whatever. So people wanted help on really seeking expertise with grant assistance. And then the third bullet point deals with funding for workforce development. Everybody gets that workforce development, such a critical issue right now. The fourth one, more information on intergovernmental agreements, and towns and counties want to work together on this issue. And fifth bullet point, really no list of. I think that fifth bullet point is kind of, is there another game in town for funding besides BEAD right now in Wisconsin, and the challenges of funding being removed from the state budget as we deploy here. And then the last piece, the challenge perhaps to small ISPs in particular from the BEAD regulations of the 25% letter of credit. They have been speaking up about that. Jess, if you want to.
I don't think there's any surprise that policy has come out, and it's not. We all realize we're all building this airplane while we're flying it. And so the feds are developing their part, the state is trying to develop, and then local officials are also looking at their policy and regulations that they have. And just understanding, I think there was a lack of understanding yet in how participants will be able to participate in that next challenge process that'll be open for counties, organizations, and ISPs. There's a real need to take a look at streamlining. We heard that over and over again, whether it was streamlining the process to get the okay to utilize the data. And there was one that we needed to look at when we were doing WISER, and one that when we were doing OptiMap, and all the different processes and that we need to have, and all the processes we need to get access to that data. And then also streamlining application process. You have to first get an IRF account, and then we need a cost quest. And so folks were feeling a little frustrated and needing a help to figure out how to maneuver that, as well as need for, how do we look at the need for mapping and looking at some of that middle mile, as well as developing some of those redundancies. Policy, and I think this one kind of went with funding as well, but looking at those line extensions, the high cost to those, and how we're going to handle those. And then subcontracts with ISPs. There was frustration about, we're going to be looking at those subcontracts of who's going to be doing the build out, and yet the planning grants that were given to counties and the redos, their timeline is really after the fact. So how do we bridge that, and why do communities need to continue planning? And just identifying and addressing those federal, state, and local legislations and policies that may hinder broadband access and development. And then there was comment about, how do we get some utilities to install fiber instead of older technologies as they're doing new builds.
Yeah,
right.
so.
Almost done here.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's right, yeah.
The fourth one was planning. There were a lot of comments around planning. Like we said earlier, the communities are kind of all in different places right now with where they're at in their processes. So some folks were really excited about the potential plan template that we're planning. Motivating, some folks were asking about motivating local officials to engage in planning when they kind of feel like the decisions have already been made. Even down to how to form a committee and how to get elected officials and or community input or buy-in. This one we heard a lot. They really want more best practices and examples from each other. And we even had a comment about hearing what are other countries doing. And this includes digital equity examples and hearing about what's being done about digital redlining and stuff like that. Understanding the extended ACAM locations and kind of trying to avoid a CAF2 situation. Planning for middle versus last mile was really important to some of the folks we've been talking to. They wanted to know the differences between the two. Needing streamlined processes and support from some local contacts for obtaining easements. And then needing support for working with other state and federal agencies and private organizations, which can sometimes affect the timing of what they're trying to do when you've got to get someone else involved. For example, like the railroad organizations. So, and then the need for additional specific planning resources and checklists. Last one.
All right, is it my turn now?
Yes.
I've done this. I did this to Jessica in one of our regional workshops as well. Like that. So, but we're also hearing with respect to public-private partnerships, though, needing help in negotiating contracts and agreements with internet service providers and the general do's and don'ts, and understanding the permitting process involved in many cases. Understanding how to evaluate contract performance with internet service providers, and the need to be able to identify partners on a county and regional basis. I'm not 100% certain exactly what's intended here when this is, but we think with respect to anchor institutions and others, certainly so many other partners, countywide and regionally. And then the challenge, it's sometimes difficult to know who to work, who to reach out to at ISPs, but conversely, we heard the same thing from them, that they are saying that it's difficult, that we're looking for champions locally, and that they've, some of them have had challenges in reaching. I wasn't expecting that, but we had that from them. And then of course, more collaboration across regions and public entities and working with internet service providers.
So next we want to just take a little bit about how do we address some of those gaps and those barriers. And that's going to be collectively. We know it's going to take a lot of people, and all of us that are on this call and the different organizations we work with that are going to need to pull together to address them. But we want to take a look and offer you a few of the things that we are in Extension are going to do to address some of these gaps.
Yeah, well, we've already talked about the toolkit, so I won't spend a lot of time here, but what's upcoming for the toolkit is, as I said earlier, it's going to be growing as we go. We are going to be including a template for a community plan very soon. We have planned some information that will be up there on public-private partnerships, on funding and financing, and we will also have some modules soon on that are specific to digital equity and digital literacy.
All right. And so for our planned webinars, some of the upcoming, hopefully this winter. So as we, among other things, a BEAD challenge process. We have a broadband plan template for communities, and one from the Board of Commissioners on Public Lands. In case you're surprised by this one, this has cropped up as a potential funding source that is being recommended, that I think they had asked to meet with us. So we're delighted that that's the case. There's one on the co-op model and the Center for Cooperatives at UW, and then funding applications processes, and at least one on digital equity and digital literacy that'll be forthcoming.
We plan to kick off our round 2 of our regional workshops earlier in the year next year, hoping to give people as many resources as we can before it comes time to take a look at applying for those subcontracts. So we want those partnerships developed. What we'll be looking at is doing those potentially instead of 2-day workshops, increasing the number of workshops, and partnering with our folks at the Redos and WEDC to plan those. So we'll have more across the state, which will give us closer locales for people to drive, but then also allow us to have more regional conversations about how the region can also solve their problems, but also more opportunities to learn from one another of best practices of what's happening in the area. The last place we're looking at doing some work to address those needs is building some more capacity. We have just closed our posting for 3 positions. Extension is in the process of hiring 3 positions that will join our broadband team for the next several years to help build capacity. One will be on community planning. The other one will be on partnerships, working with ISPs and communities and organizations to build those partnerships. And the last one will be on resource procurement. We'll take a look at different additional funding sources and ways that communities can build procurement to help move these projects along. So we know some of the things we will be doing in extension based on the feedback we're getting, but we will be sharing this information with the task force. We think this is a great place for folks to start, to take a look at what we're hearing across the state. They may become themes as we take a look at a task force of where we need to explore and focus some of our work. Certainly the Public Service Commission, Wisconsin Broadband Office, we have a number of legislators who are on the task force, but also listening and keeping track of what's going on. These may be key themes for those legislators to also investigate and take up. And our state organizations, agencies, nonprofits, our ISPs and their associations, WEDC and our Redos, I guess we just challenge everyone to start thinking about what is their role in helping find solutions to address these broadband issues. And with that, I guess we can ask if anyone has any questions.
Questions on the presentation?
I have a very basic question, pardon my perhaps ignorance. You talked about mapping, how important mapping is for our plans, right? And you talk about 3 different data points for mapping, the FCC, Wiser, and OptiMap. How do those 3 differ among each other? But in particular, OptiMap, I don't know what that is. I'm a little more familiar with FCC and Wiser, but not the other one. I don't
Maybe
know.
Rory, do you want to take?
Yeah,
I
you want me
mean,
to
we
take a
can,
crack
but
at
I
this
think,
one?
yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So Sal, great question. I think this is some of the confusion, and we've evolved from this world a year or two ago where we felt like we didn't have any data and we didn't know what was going on to
Right.
we pushed and we worked hard, and we're almost punished by our success of having so much data.
Mhm.
So, I think you named some of the big three data sets that we're working with on a day-to-day when we're trying to figure out about broadband access, infrastructure access, but also some of those softer things like affordability and adoption.
Mhm.
So the FCC data set that we always talk about, that's kind of the information submitted by internet service providers to FCC, and that's shared with us as well. That's like the national broadband map. That's that point-based map that tells us, oh, I have, so-and-so internet service provider at this speed and this technology available at my location. And then you can call that ISP and get service. That's the FCC map. That's really the baseline for some of our funding decisions. Then there is the Wiser survey, which we're really proud of. This is, I think we got 11,000, Alyssa was bragging earlier, 11,000 survey responses. The Wiser survey is kind of a combination of a couple things. It's a tool that will measure, when you take the survey, it'll run a speed test and it'll identify how fast of actual speeds you're experiencing at the moment of that test due to your subscription, due to the the actual connection to your home, but also, your router, your Wi-Fi, your device, all those things. It also, in the Wiser test, is kind of a user experience survey, and we ask questions about, do you think your internet's affordable? Is it reliable? We ask for some demographic information if you're willing to share it, and then kind of some of those softer questions about how is your experience using the internet? What are some limitations to you accessing or using the internet? Just to get a kind of an idea of some of those adoption and digital equity focused challenges to getting meaningful connectivity. So the Wiser survey is kind of speed test, a little bit access, but also a lot of adoption and affordability questions as well. And then lastly, OptiMap. This one might not be familiar because they've changed names recently. We used to call it the GeoPartners survey, the GeoPartners speed test. They rebranded. It's still kind of the same thing with a little bit more analytical tools on the back end for folks. That's a survey tool that's been used substantially by kind of our redos and our county partners in a lot of places. That one is primarily a speed test that's going to measure your speed mapped to your location. In recent year or so, there's a little bit more data paired with it, but overall that one's a speed test and helps give a quick view of where in a county or a region are folks not accessing high-speed internet for whatever reason. Sorry, that was potentially a long-winded answer, but that's kind of
that was perfect. Thank you, Rory. That was perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to know. That's very important. Thank you for your explanation.
And I think that's why people are confused, right?
Yeah, because it takes me 5 minutes to explain it, right?
Thank you so much. That's perfect explanation. Thank you, Rory.
Any other questions for us?
More a comment than a question, but I'm so glad that you're going to be talking with the BCPL. They are very important to our organization and they're really great guys over there. So I really hope that you're finding like good partnerships for funding because they are so important to us.
We're very excited. They actually approached us and said, we'd like to help partners. So that's great. And our communities were very excited, especially even those that have been working on projects for a long time. We're like, we didn't think about them.
I'll say I have a comment, Gail. I think this is a really good presentation, and I appreciated kind of the multitude of questions and takeaways and more opportunities for growth. Like it's crazy how many there are, but it's almost a good problem because I feel like if people are asking questions like that and staying engaged, they're learning a lot. So now they're asking more questions, right? Like I would be worried if we had no takeaways or only a couple of challenges, because then that would tell us people aren't involved. They don't know what's going on. But now I feel like we're building some capacity and people are asking the right questions at the right time. So pros and cons to having a big, long list, huh?
Pros and cons to having a big, long list, but I think it shows that people are engaged.
Yeah.
And they're in it for the long haul. It's like, it's not, the money's going to be there and it's done. We
Yeah.
have to figure out how we're gonna make it work best.
Agreed.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, Gail and team. That was educational. Thank you for the time and the information. Moving on to item number 5 on our agenda, group discussion. I think Kristen is going to be running this for us again this year. So welcome back, Kristen. Thank you for your help, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's good to be back, and it's good to see everybody on Zoom today. I am going to put a link to our Google slide document into the chat, and I'm also going to share my screen in just a second. Just as last year, we collected homework, a couple of open-ended questions via a Qualtrics survey, which everyone fills out anonymously. That material always makes it onto our Google slideshow, and we'll be using the same link that we've used in the last 2 years. That's a persistent slideshow on Google Docs. It is publicly viewable. So when we upload information, I upload it anonymously, and then we preserve a copy of this and send it to the PSC because it is a public document after this. But today, what I would like to do is to go over the questions that we posed that will help us shape the year of our work over the next year as the task force. While I am doing this, let's see here. There we go. You should be able to see it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great. I'm going to keep this screen up. If you're able to access the slide, and I know not everybody is, some people have this blocked at work, but what you'll see is that we're going to have this group discussion as a large group today rather than breaking into our customary groups. The questions will be posed on each one of the slides and the answers, and then there are 2 blank slides afterwards. While we're discussing, please feel free to take notes on the blank slides. If you don't have access to the slides and you're only viewing this on your screen as part of the meeting and you don't have a separate access, then please put your comments or anything you'd like to add to the blank slides in the chat box, and I will upload those into this document so that we have your conversation contributions preserved. Simply what I'd like to do today is have an open-ended discussion going over the questions, and I'm going to keep this in not in presentation format, in notes format, so that I can kind of see what's happening here. But the first question we posed to the group in the Qualtrics homework survey is, what are the key topics that we should explore this year? And we had 2 pages worth of responses to this. So I'll go over them very briefly, the responses, go over the first one, the second slide, I'll come back to the first, and then we can discuss as a group what we might like to add or what suggestions we think are particularly good for the course of this upcoming year. So we had the next 2 years are all about BEAD. If there are things that the group can do to assist or enable that process that makes sense. This respondent said they'd consider if the time spent running the task force might make sense for the PSC and the broadband office during the BEAD process. Perhaps we have an ad hoc committee that works on this. Second, establish and support a coalition of willing, engaged broadband leaders to connect communities and providers. Third, develop and improve outreach for the Affordable Connectivity Program. Fourth, fund and support annual statewide mapping and data collection efforts. And we did just hear quite a bit about the efforts that have been going on to make data more available, and that we're in a considerably better position than we were maybe a year or 2 ago, but still, obviously, this is a crucial need for us as a group. Second slide, and I'll go back so that you can refer to the first one as we're talking. Identify state and organizational agencies that are involved in broadband deployment, describe their roles, services, and resources. Identify middle mile fiber availability in remote areas of state, a directory of providers, again, looking at information gathering and connecting. Affordability needs to continue to be a focus, is a suggestion of something that we should continue to look at. Grants, an overview of how communities can respond, workforce development issues. What are the hidden costs of federal and BEAD funding? An example is the letter of credit requirement. There's significant costs associated with this, and some ISPs might have trouble meeting those costs. Are there other red tape items that we should be paying attention to? Can the state work with NTIA to reduce the costs associated? And all the extra costs do impact affordability to the end user. So for this one, I'll go back to the first slide. What are the key topics? What on this list do you like? What are the things that you want to see us cover for sure? Are there some items in here or missing items, some things that maybe you've been inspired by after looking at that list that you would like us to talk about over the course of the next year? And I am going to be quiet and let the group respond. I don't see any hands going up yet. And you can feel free to just unmute your mic, task force members, and share. Brittany.
Good afternoon. So one of the things that does pop up here on the second page is workforce, but it probably would be good to make sure that we have that as a topic inside of that. I mean, certainly paying attention to the development and implementation of BEAD and digital equity as they go along, but there's a part inside of BEAD and digital equity about developing the workforce, and it would be very good to understand how that network of players is being developed inside of the state as things go along as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Brittany. Other comments or endorsements for items on here, or suggestions or additions?
I'm sorry, I'm driving.
Go ahead.
So this is Celeste, and I'm driving. But one of the things that I think, I don't know if this would be an appropriate time to talk about it, but knowing that there's going to be so much activity in preparing for BEAD, having discussions around make ready and permitting and how, and locating and how do we help the state and and these companies or these locators or just prepare for all of that activity to make sure that all of this stuff is being installed and it's safe and we're meeting timelines and we have the appropriate workforce. It kind of I don't know if that can somehow we can just think about how all of this activity is going to impact all of that.
Thank you, Celeste. Excellent suggestions. I believe someone else had unmuted for a moment while Celeste came on.
Yeah,
Sal?
I had a couple of questions. The first was basically in the first question about the task force, does that mean that this would be just an ad hoc committee, part of the task force, correct? It wouldn't be the task force not continuing and just have the ad hoc, or the task force will continue with an ad hoc committee? In the first question.
In the first question, I am not sure that I am interpreting that correctly, because I think it could go either way.
That's what I'm a little confused, is if there's that this group can do to assist, otherwise, having an ad hoc committee. That's the way I read it. I read it almost like saying maybe the task force doesn't need to be involved in this BEAD process, and we just have an ad hoc committee. Is that the question?
I think that might have been a suggestion, yes. And I'm not sure that the person who contributed that is on the call right now. So I'm afraid I'm not able to clarify.
Yeah, that would need to be clarified. Yeah.
I think, Sal, the way I'm reading that is it's a suggestion that the task force meet maybe upon request of our team if we want to if we have BEAD items or things to discuss, rather than have the monthly cadence. That's how I read that suggestion.
Yeah, that's exactly how I read it, that perhaps the ad hoc committee would be doing their work, and then whenever they have something to share with the task force, then the task force will be convened for update and questions and answers and advice and stuff. Is that correct?
I didn't write it, so I'm not sure, but I think that's kind of how we did it this summer for the
Yeah.
couple months this
I
summer.
mean,
with
that, yeah, okay. That could work as long as the task force continues being part of the process.
We
at
love
some
the task force, so as far as I'm concerned, we would never ditch you guys out of the process.
Okay, that was exactly the question. But yeah, okay.
I have my task force Wednesdays reserved. I would miss everyone.
There you go.
So
You know, Rory, this is Chris, and in regards to that one, yeah, I don't know that I necessarily agree with that one. I understand what they're saying. You know, certainly I think that we're at a point where if we have a month where there's a bit of a lull and there's, you know, we're scrambling to get content for an agenda, it would be appropriate for us to just not have that meeting. But I do like, this is my opportunity each month for me to, I will say this in quotations, maintain my expert level understanding of what's happening in the broadband space by learning from everybody. So for that purpose, I do think it's valuable, but I don't disagree. If we're stretching for content, it's probably okay if we have to, you know, push a meeting out to the next month or something like that. I would be supportive of that, but I think that's probably fairly infrequent.
I would agree with Chris. I think, you know, we're building this as we're flying and we don't know what's coming up. And so it helps us to know what's going on, but it also helps us to give feedback and get feedback from each other and figure out how we can assist. So I guess I think staying fully engaged is important. But certainly I agree with Chris. If there's a month that we don't need to meet, we don't need to meet. And maybe there will be places where I'm thinking other years we have had some ad hoc groups that tackled certain things to help prepare. And I think that makes good sense.
I agree totally. And on occasion, we might not need to have the full time that we usually devote for this. We could have a shorter time just to address the issues that we want to address. Yeah. But I agree with both of you.
excellent, excellent. Thank you for bringing that up, Sal, and for contributing, everyone. Let's move on to the second question. If you have suggestions for the first, please do feel free to drop those in the chat or write them directly into the blank slides after the first question. I realize we're on a timeline here, so I'll keep us moving while we're continuing to have this very good conversation. Are there any suggestions for speakers or presenters? And so the question answers ran to grant recipients, workforce, digital equity. What are they doing? How can we help? We'd love to hear from providers, telcos, co-ops, municipals. What are they envisioning for the project? What are their pain points? What barriers do they see in the field? A topic suggestion was the status of the various funded projects around the state, perhaps using the state map as a resource, particularly how the RDOF funded projects will impact future funding areas. And then the last one, while I don't have a suggestion for a specific speaker, it would be nice to hear from the state, regional, local officials who are overseeing broadband access and provide an overview on its progress and its challenges. This could offer insight for the task force to make recommendations. So what other suggestions would we have for speakers and presenters, and maybe reflecting also on what Gail, Chris, and Jessica presented? And there are a number of items in there that might lend themselves to speakers or special presentations. We are a quiet group today.
I think when you're looking at RDOF, we also, with the extended ACAM, the enhanced ACAM is something that people are really questioning a lot and want to know about. So it might be good for us as a group to understand that better and where those locations are and what that does to how our funds, BEAD funds are allocated.
Yeah.
And it might be something just along those same funding as we're exploring other funding mechanisms and what's out there. You know, we heard that looking at other funding options for communities. People were very, I think, welcome the information that they got from Bill and Omakin and Carl Green on funding options for communities and how ISPs could with them. That might be another one, as well as I think hearing from Wisconsin Counties Association. That was another piece that was, and their attorney, on what should communities consider and how do we help them gain the right tools in their toolbox.
And Carl Green and Bill Omakin are the local government education specialist and program manager. And I believe they went over bonding.
Bonding was one of their
Was
issues.
one of their topics. So Sal.
Well, go ahead, Sal.
Sorry again. One of the things that would be helpful for the task force, and I don't, perhaps the public in general, is what is the status of the various projects, and you know, we talk about mapping and what information the mapping is going to give us and the data is going to give to us, like Rory mentioned. Because if we can find out what is the status of the projects, and then we can find out where are the barriers or the areas where we are not making progress. That might be very helpful for those in our task force that are in those areas to give us this input, right? To let us know. We can then go there. I don't know if there's a dashboard that you already have or that could be available. So before we have a meeting with the task force, we can go to the dashboard and find those, bottlenecks, right? I think that would be very helpful for the task force to be able to access.
Thank you, Sal. Steve, you unmuted.
I was just going to comment that it might be interesting to have some of the underwriters that actually have sold the bonds and the financial consultants to the counties come in at some point and as a resource, because I think it's a fairly complicated process, and there are ways, I think, of leveraging between bond funds and that 25% LOC, for instance. In other words, you can use your bond funds to underwrite the LOC. So I think there's a lot of tools out there, but perhaps getting even some out-of-state resources in from the folks who have helped the existing projects might be useful.
Steve, I was just about to jump in and say, task force members, you're always welcome to come and present too if you feel like there are topics you want to present about, because we have a lot of expertise on this task force. And this is maybe the perfect chance for me to nudge you and say, Bug Tussel's a known, expert and has a lot of experience in bonding. So if you, a member of your team, or some contacts you have, we'd appreciate hearing from those.
Yeah, certainly. And I would say, feel free to reach out whenever you think I may be useful. I'm a little hesitant to insert myself, given all the things we have going, but I'm always willing to jabber about what we're doing. So
great. Thanks.
You do have a wealth of knowledge. Yes.
Kristen, this is Chris. Just one thought, and this isn't a major thing, but when we started this whole process, one of the things that happened was we had a lot of, I know Senator Baldwin was up in Wausau a couple of years ago, had a roundtable, and local businesses came in and talked about the experiences they'd had with broadband. Of course, these were bad experiences. It'd be good, and I'm not sure if it's the regional economic development organizations that could do this, but it'd be good to hear some of the success stories from the work that's done. And it doesn't need to be like an entire meeting. Maybe it's, a couple of showcase things that we do at the end of each meeting. Here's something that's happened as the result of the broadband task force work or in the Public Service Commission's work. I find a lot of satisfaction in hearing those stories. I know that we sit here, we meet, and sometimes we don't always feel like we move the needle a lot, but when you see a big piece of equipment in your ditch putting fiber in your front yard, like, hey, that's what we did. And I think it'd be good for the task force to hear some of those success stories.
All right. Thank you very much. We've got a couple more questions on here, but I'm also looking at the time that it's 2:12. I am going to keep this up, but if we don't have any more active suggestions, please feel free to fill this out yet today. If you have other suggestions, or send a note to me. I think just keeping an eye on the time, I'm going to turn it back over to Rory, or to Chris, I'm sorry, And then we can keep moving along on the schedule. Thank you all so much for your participation. We'll continue to ask these questions and make sure that we're shaping this year to be both useful and interesting for us.
Yes, thank you, Kristen. Excited to see what we have presented to us this year. So thank you for your work today on that. Next item on the agenda is the Public Service Commission presentation on state challenge process, BEAD initial proposal volume 1. Rory, is this you or is this Alyssa?
Some of both. You get a little bit of both. I think Alyssa's going to share the slides right now. We can see them.
Oh, and I'm going to begin talking, right?
Yeah. I hope so.
Yes, I am. So just a couple of quick updates from our office before we get into BEAD Volume 1. I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows we do actually have an open grant round right now. I know there's a lot of focus on BEAD, and there's been some focus on the fact that there's not state dollars in the budget this year, but there's capital projects. And so this is sort of part of ARPA. It's an open state grant round for broadband infrastructure with a particular emphasis on communities that were most impacted by COVID. And it's 42 million, and applications are due on November 7th. And I just wanted to make sure to really highlight for members of the task force that that there is open grants, and there's an open broadband infrastructure grant actually happening right now. The second thing I want to update for folks, and I think I'm going to make at least a small attempt at doing a quick tour, is the broadband office, with the help and guidance and leadership of our really excellent GIS team, has launched this new Wisconsin broadband planning map. And I'm going to make a shot at this. What I really want to show people from this map is, when you get to it at first, it looks like these kind of colored hexes that people are probably pretty familiar with. They used to be census blocks. What you've been hearing from us is, no, now it's locations. And so what I want to make sure people know is, and I'm hoping this translates, is if you zoom in, give me a nod if it's actually zoomed in and people see.
It looks good. You can see points.
Yeah, you can actually see the points down to the location now on our map, and their color is by their BEAD eligibility. So communities should be able to look right down to the end of the driveway on a household in their community and see at the point level if they are eligible for BEAD. It's no longer this, your area generally. Likewise,
and you can click on those points too, Alyssa.
Yeah, and you could click on the point and see, yep, it's a non-residential, it's unserved, there's the address. Likewise, and now I'm going to struggle a tiny bit with, I heard, we were talking just a minute ago about GeoPartners or OptiMap and Wiser. All that data is also in the map now. So if you want to go to one of those same locations, you can look at what the speed test at that location said if it was done. And so I can click on this location and I can see, oh, there was a speed test. OptiMap is the provider. This is what the speed test result there was. So I can look both at what they're reporting and what a speed test said using the map now. And then the last thing I wanted to say, and I know I'm going off script, but similarly, if you're not sure if my location has ACAM, it's in the map now. And so you can go, and so I have infrastructure support and then ACAM, but I can look and see, okay, yeah, there's some red dots over here, but I can see Hillsborough Telephone Company has ACAM there. And so a lot of these things that we're looking for, the broadband office has available in many, many complex map layers, but I do want to just make sure, as folks are wondering, they are here, or many of them are here, and they've gotten just infinitely, not infinitely, but they've gotten exceptionally better, and there's just a tremendous amount more data. So people are saying, I want to know if there's ACAM in my community. You can light the layer up on a map. They want to say, I want to know the speed tests in my community. You can find it on the map now. So I just want to make sure people know about this broadband planning map, are sort of starting to get familiar with it, but it's really a tremendous sort of asset. And now I'm gonna move forward with the rest of the presentation. I just, as people were talking, I was like, I should show some layers. We keep telling people to go there, but let's see, I hope, yes. So I just showed off the map, so I don't think I need to talk about it anymore. 1 year ago, we were all in Wausau. I said this has been our year of planning. We talked about our digital equity plan. The other thing commission staff has done, and you will see many, many task force goals and meeting notes and task force conversations threaded throughout this. But in August, we submitted our 5-year plan. And in September, it was approved by NTIA. This establishes kind of the vision and goal for BEAD and sort of outlines those sort of audacious goals, identifies the needs and gaps, and really sort of outlines the very high level plan for universal service by 2030. So that's the first step of BEAD. I don't know why a 5-year plan is the first step and an initial proposal is the last step, but it's the way they did it. Again, these are the BEAD goals. Hopefully these are incredibly familiar to task force members because they reflect or sort of consolidate goals that have been in task force reports: highest possible level of deployment and adoption, sustained long-term impact on Wisconsin residents, affordability, reliability, and that sufficient trained broadband workforce. And I'm gonna do this slide, and then Rory's gonna do the rest. Yes, I'm doing this slide. So the next phase in BEAD is for the commission to submit an initial proposal. And we've elected to do this in 2 volumes. And we haven't elected to do this in 2 volumes because we like writing lots of memos and having lots of different comment periods. The reason the commission has elected to do it in 2 volumes is we want to establish and get our challenge process approved so we can run our challenge process while the federal government and NTIA is reviewing our subgrant process. And the reason for that is when the subgrant process is approved, that starts that very rapid 1-year period where we have to do our subgranting. So our goal is to get those eligible locations really firmed up and then start, and not have to spend the first part of our kind of subgranting year on the challenge process. And so we're doing it hopefully to save us time and to make sure that when we really get to that kind of very fast BEAD part, that we're really ready. And so volume 1 is out for comment right now. I'm going to pass it to Rory and give him the rest of the time to kind of talk through the high level, but I just want to know people to sort of understand why we're doing it in 2 volumes. I would also say it's largely recommended or encouraged by NTIA. And I'm going to go to the next slide for you, right? Yes.
Thanks. So I'll talk briefly about the state challenge process, just to translate it from a very long memo and a lot of complicated paperwork to something that means something for actual BEAD implementation. But first, I think it's always good to visit our little Gantt chart and see where are we and where are we headed. So this is, I cut off the top, which is maybe a bad idea because it takes away all the cool planning and implementation and conversations we've had this last year and all of our year of planning. But this is kind of where are we headed. So there's a big yellow arrow, state challenge process development. We just wrapped up that. We're still kind of in public comment. And we're also working very, very hard these days on the initial proposal volume 2, which is kind of the other half of implementation. That's the subgranting process and kind of how we pick our grantees and award grants. So, you know, we're going to work on that through the end of this year. All of that initial proposal needs to be done just after Christmas. And then next year, we're going to run with implementation, starting with this state challenge process that we're talking about now, actually implementing kind of the plan that's out for public comment right now into a year of allocating grants and then administering and building and actually making the connectivity work. So on the next slide, I'll just say at a really high level, the state challenge process is about defining the map of Wisconsin that still needs internet investment for internet service. So at a high level, we have this map of locations in Wisconsin that are unserved and underserved. You hear that a lot. We're going to take that map and we're going to adjust it a little bit. We're going to put it out for really kind of a public review and then kind of have a last chance effort to get every single bit right that we can. Because once we're done with that challenge process, we're going to have basically a list of probably a couple 100,000 locations that the broadband office is going to open up for bids and grant applications to build and receive BEAD funding for. So what we're going to start with is the FCC map. And it's really a kind of a 4-ish step process. So we'll start with the FCC map. Number 1 here, identify all those unserved and underserved locations. That's the 250,000 unserved and then another 211,000 underserved. We're going to remove from that list all of the locations we know that are currently getting help already. So that's all of the locations that have RDOF, have state broadband grant awards. You know, the list it's a huge list here, but we call them enforceable funding commitments. We're going to remove all those locations because we know there's already funding in progress. Folks are building, they're planning on building there. It's for, you know, it's in progress. We're going to remove all of those. And we're also going to remove some planned builds, some opportunities for ISPs and other partners to say, I'm finishing up building infrastructure. I'll be done by June 30th. Once we remove those existing locations, we'll jump to step 3. We'll also need to add back to our map all of our community anchor institutions. The FCC's map doesn't do a good job of mapping CAIs, so we need to do a little bit of extra work to add those back. And then we'll make some adjustments, some modifications. You can read more about these, time constrained. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but basically we're allowed to make some adjustments up front to move some locations into eligible. And that's all the DSL locations, fixed wireless locations, and community anchor institutions and MDUs so that they're able to get access to BEAD funding and compete for that BEAD funding. And then what that looks like, Alyssa's got this chart on the next slide here. These are made up numbers. I really don't want to commit to any of these numbers at this point, but, you know, we'll start with those 250,000 unserved, 211,000 underserved, subtract a bunch of locations that are in progress, subtract in progress from our grant programs that we administer, add back some locations based on those modifications I just mentioned, and then we'll end up with some hypothetical number. Do not quote these numbers, they're made up. Of these are the locations we're going to fund with BEAD. So it sounds like we have 460,000 locations for BEAD to fund. We probably have maybe closer to half that. Again, please don't quote me, but, you know, don't divide $1 billion by 500,000 locations because you'll get pretty discouraged. I think there's a lot of other work going on here, and we want to take that into account. So this is that quick timeline, and then I think I'll kind of wrap up. But the state challenge process we are going to run through, it's out for public comment right now. We'd love to hear comments. It'll go to NTIA for some review and approval. And if everything goes well, the first couple months of next year, we'll have kind of this 90-day process. And the 90 days is specified by NTIA. We can't change it, even though we'd love more time if we could. And it'll be kind of, we'll publish the map. Folks will submit challenges for 30 days. We'll see another 30 days of submitting rebuttals. And then lastly, 30 days for us to kind of, the PSC to review and adjudicate and decide. And at the end of that, we'll have basically that map I was talking about of the fundable locations. So more for another time, but there's lots of different challenges. You can read about it in the document, but really we'd love if you go online, go to our IRF, go to our WBO website. There's links on to that process and how to comment. I can maybe drop those in chat in the last couple minutes here if you want to go and click and read through the process and submit a comment. The comment deadline is October 30th at 1 p.m. So we got about 2 weeks or so to get a comment in, and then we'll take those to the commission and kind of finalize this challenge process and submit it to NTIA. So very quickly and brief, that's the state challenge process. It's a really important first step to making sure that we have the right locations on our list to fund. And then we'll go into that implementation where we start giving out grants to actually fund those locations. So I think we maybe don't have time for questions looking at the time, Chris. So maybe any final thoughts or wrap up from Chris? Otherwise, I can do a little bit of final housekeeping for the day here on the task force.
I don't have anything, Rory, so you go right ahead.
Great. So I will say our next meeting is scheduled for November 8th. I need to send that meeting invite just immediately after this meeting, so I'll get to that. We're still working on an agenda. Obviously, all the feedback and brainstorming that we've heard from you today will help inform that. So we'll be working on that agenda as well. But I just want to say it's a pleasure to have you all here for another year. And I think a lot of the content we've talked about today is a really nice foundation for another year of learning and growing and pushing for BEAD and DE implementation among every other program that we're running over here at the Broadband Office. So thanks all. Chris, any final words?
No, thank you to everybody again for coming back for another year with the Broadband Task Force. And a special thanks to the Broadband Office who kept the wheels on the bus throughout the summer and got a lot of things accomplished. They're the glue that holds all this together. So we appreciate your work too. So unless there are any other closing comments from anyone, we can wrap up today and adjourn. Any last comments? Going once, going twice. I think we can consider our meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
Chris.
you, Chris.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everybody.